Have you ever imagined that the colleague you trusted with your life was actually digging your grave? And if one day you discovered she believed your company was hers, what would you do? I chose revenge, not with words, but with a deal that ensured she'd never hold her head high again. The sweetest victory isn't just winning, it's watching them realize they never stood a chance. This is how I sold the company she thought was hers, right from under her perfectly manicured feet. My name is Emily Carter, and at 34, I've learned that in the tech startup world of Brookview, you either build your empire or watch someone steal it brick by brick. This city, nestled between Silicon Valley wannabes and East Coast traditionalists, has become a breeding ground for small tech companies with big dreams and even bigger egos. The glass towers downtown reflect more than just sunlight. They mirror the cutthroat ambitions of everyone trying to make it here. I wasn't born into this world of venture capital and pitch decks. My parents ran a small hardware store in Ohio until Amazon killed it when I was 16. Watching them lose everything they'd built taught me a lesson I'd never forget. Own what you create, or someone else will take it from you. That lesson drove me through state college, through countless unpaid internships, through nights sleeping under my desk at companies that saw me as just another disposable cog. Nexalink Solutions wasn't just my company, it was my redemption story. Every line of code, every client pitch, every 16-hour day was a brick in the wall between me and the helplessness I'd felt watching my parents pack up their store for the last time. I started it in my studio apartment 3 years ago, surviving on ramen and pure determination while my college friends posted photos from their honeymoons and housewarming parties. The breakthrough came with our proprietary algorithm for supply chain optimization. It sounds boring, but to Fortune 500 companies hemorrhaging money on inefficiencies, it was gold. Within 18 months, we went from my laptop on a card table to a real office with 12 employees. The algorithm was my baby. I'd coded the core framework during a particularly brutal bout of insomnia, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of desperation that only entrepreneurs understand. Our office occupied the 7th floor of a renovated warehouse in Brookview's up-and-coming tech district. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs, the whole startup aesthetic that was supposed to scream innovation but really just meant we couldn't afford proper interior design. My desk sat in the corner, deliberately modest, though I could have claimed the conference room with its view of the city skyline. That wasn't my style. I wanted to be in the trenches with my team, feeling the pulse of the company I'd built from nothing. Every morning, I'd arrive before 7, watching the sunrise paint the Brookview skyline gold through our floor-to-ceiling windows. Those quiet moments, before the chaos of emails and meetings began, were when I felt most connected to what we were building. The weight of responsibility. For my employees, for our investors, for the vision I'd sold them all on, sat on my shoulders like a familiar friend. I remember the exact moment I realized Nexalink had become more than just a business to me. It was a Thursday evening, the office empty except for me and the junior developer who always stayed late. I was reviewing our latest client acquisition, a major retail chain that would triple our revenue. When it hit me, this was no longer about proving something to my dead parents or to the world. This company had become my identity, my worth, my entire sense of self. Perhaps that's why I was blind to what was coming. When you pour everything into something, you forget that others might see it not as your life's work, but as an opportunity to take. Veronica Hale entered my life like a perfectly timed solution to a problem I didn't know I had. It was during our Series A funding round when everything was chaos, investors breathing down my neck, deadlines multiplying like cancer cells, and me trying to be CEO, CTO, and CFO all at once. Our lead investor insisted I needed someone with financial sophistication, and Veronica came with sterling recommendations from 2 successful exits in the Boston tech scene. At 32, she possessed the kind of polished beauty that made people underestimate her intelligence, sleek auburn hair that never seemed out of place, designer suits that whispered money rather than screamed it, and a smile that could warm a conference room or freeze it, depending on her agenda. I should have paid more attention to how quickly that smile could change. The first few months were intoxicating. Veronica handled our books with surgical precision, charming investors with her ability to turn our burn rate into a strategic growth investment. She had this way of tilting her head when listening, making you feel like your words were the most important thing she'd heard all day. Even our most skeptical board member, Richard Steinberg, who'd made his fortune being paranoid, seemed enchanted by her quarterly presentations. Small things started happening around month 4. I'd mention an idea in our morning coffee runs, just the two of us, what I thought was friendship building, and suddenly she'd be presenting it at the afternoon meeting with subtle modifications that made it sound like her innovation. As Emily and I were discussing, she'd say, but somehow the emphasis always landed on the I. Then came the report incidents. I'd send her final numbers to review, and the versions that reached our investors would have minor alterations. Nothing dramatic, a shifted decimal here, a reattributed metric there. Always in her favor. Always making her department seem like the engine driving our growth while positioning me as the administrator keeping the lights on. The first time I confronted her, she gasped with such genuine shock that I felt like a paranoid fool. "Oh my God, Emily, that must have been the old version. I'm so embarrassed. You know how scattered I've been with the Henderson acquisition?" She squeezed my shoulder, her manicured nails pressing just hard enough to feel like reassurance rather than threat. "We're a team, right? Your success is my success." But the whispers had already started. During a networking event at the Brookview Hilton, I overheard 2 investors by the bar. "Veronica's the real brain there. Emily's great with the technical stuff, but Veronica understands business." When I walked over, they shifted topics so smoothly I almost believed I'd imagined it. The company holiday party should have been my wake-up call. Veronica gave a toast that sounded supportive but was laced with poison. To Emily, who had the courage to start this journey, and to the team that turned her little project into a real company. Little project. The words lodged in my chest like shrapnel. Her manipulations grew bolder. She started scheduling strategic meetings with key clients while I was traveling, sending follow-up emails that CC'd me but positioned herself as the primary contact. She hired an assistant who reported directly to her, creating an information bottleneck I didn't notice until important emails started accidentally not reaching me. The masterstroke was her suggestion to restructure our equity distribution for tax efficiency. She presented it during a board meeting I'd missed due to a suspiciously timed flight cancellation. By the time I arrived, she'd already planted seeds of doubt about my ability to handle both technical and business leadership. "Emily's genius is in the product," she said, her voice dripping concern. "But maybe she's spreading herself too thin." I watched her work the room at industry events, her hand on executives' arms, her laugh timed perfectly to their mediocre jokes. Always introducing herself as co-founder at Nexalink, when just 6 months ago, she'd been director of finance. The correction died in my throat each time, making me look petty if I spoke up, weak if I didn't. The first real blow came through an email I wasn't supposed to see. Veronica had accidentally CC'd me on a thread with Marcus Webb, our biggest potential client, a deal that would make or break our next quarter. Except in her version of reality, she was the founder who'd brought Emily in for technical expertise. The message thread went back weeks, painting a picture of a company where I was a hired hand in my own creation. My hands shook as I scrolled through the correspondence. She'd shared modified pitch decks where her name appeared first, where my algorithm became our proprietary system developed under my direction. She'd even fabricated an origin story where she'd discovered me coding in a coffee shop and decided to give me a chance. The rage that built in my chest felt like swallowing glass. When I confronted her, she didn't even flinch. "Oh, Emily, you're misunderstanding the context. Marcus is old school. He responds better to a certain type of leadership narrative. I was just packaging our story for the audience." Her smile never wavered, but her eyes held a challenge. "What are you going to do about it?" The answer, apparently, was nothing. When I forwarded the emails to our board, Richard Steinberg called me directly. "Emily, Veronica already explained this to us. She's protecting you from the business politics so you can focus on what you do best, the technical side. Don't let ego get in the way of success. The condescension in his voice made it clear Veronica had gotten to them first. Then my emails started disappearing. Not all of them, that would have been too obvious. Just the important ones. The server logs showed access from my IP address at times I knew I'd been asleep. When IT investigated, they found the intrusions came from a VPN that traced back to a coffee shop near my apartment. Convenient. Unprovable. Documents began changing themselves. The patent application I'd filed for our core algorithm suddenly listed Veronica as co-inventor. When I pulled the original paperwork from my personal files, she produced an earlier version with her contributions detailed, pages I'd never seen before, dated weeks before my filing, with what looked like my signature authorizing her addition. The forensic document expert I hired told me, proving forgery would cost more than I had and likely fail anyway. The Hamilton contract nearly broke me. 3 months of negotiation, countless revisions, my personal guarantee on the performance metrics, all about to culminate in the signing that would establish Nexalink as a serious player. The night before, Veronica sent an urgent update to Hamilton's team about concerns regarding our technical infrastructure that needed addressing. The deal collapsed within hours. "I'm so sorry, Emily," she said the next morning, her voice syrup-sweet over coffee she'd brought as a peace offering. "I thought they knew about the scaling issues. I was just trying to be transparent. There were no scaling issues. We both knew it. But Hamilton's team now thought we were unstable. And Veronica had positioned herself as the honest executive trying to save them from my apparent deception. The pattern became clear. She wasn't just undermining me, she was rewriting history. Every early employee received subtle pressure to remember things differently. "Wasn't Veronica at that first strategy session?" she'd ask casually. Until people started believing she had been. Our company Wikipedia page kept getting edited from anonymous IPs, gradually shifting the founding story until I had to watch it like a hawk. The social media campaign was artful. She never posted anything directly claiming to be the founder, but every photo from company events positioned her at the center, me at the periphery. Every LinkedIn article she wrote referenced building Nexalink from the ground up and the vision I had for revolutionizing supply chain management. Plausible deniability wrapped in implications. My breaking point came when I discovered she'd been meeting with our competitors. Not to jump ship, that would have been too simple. She was shopping around the idea of a merger, positioning herself as the key decision-maker who could deliver Nexalink if the terms were right. The CEO of Pinnacle Systems accidentally mentioned it at a conference, thinking I was already aware of Veronica's overtures. The violation felt physical. My company, my creation, being bartered by someone who'd been here less than a year. When I pulled our incorporation documents to prove my majority ownership, I found amendments I didn't remember signing, restructuring that had happened during the chaos of funding rounds when I trusted her to handle the paperwork. I sat in my office that night, city lights blinking below, realizing I was being erased from my own story. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. Just a little bit every day, like watercolor paint bleeding at the edges until the original image disappeared completely. The board meeting that destroyed everything happened on a Tuesday that started like any other. I'd actually felt optimistic that morning. We'd just landed a small but strategic client, and I'd prepared a presentation showcasing our technical roadmap for the next 2 years. I walked into our conference room at 10 a.m. sharp, finding the board already assembled, their faces grave like judges at a tribunal. "Emily, please sit," Richard Steinberg said, gesturing to what I realized was the defendant's chair, isolated at the far end of the table while Veronica sat at his right hand, her face a masterpiece of concerned sympathy. The next 45 minutes played out like a carefully choreographed execution. Veronica presented evidence of my erratic leadership, emails I'd supposedly sent at 3 a.m. making impossible demands, fabricated. Testimonials from employees about my increasing paranoia, coerced. Financial projections showing how my technical tunnel vision was hampering growth, manipulated. She spoke softly, reluctantly, as if every word pained her. "I didn't want to bring this to the board," she said, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "Emily gave me my chance here, but I can't stand by and watch her destroy what we've all built together." The way she said "we" made it clear I was no longer part of that collective. When I tried to defend myself, my voice sounded shrill even to my own ears. Every piece of evidence I presented was met with a counter document from Veronica's perfectly organized folder. My original code commits? She had earlier sketches proving the algorithm was based on her initial concept. My early investor meetings? She produced calendar entries showing she'd been there via conference call. It was meticulous, thorough, and completely fabricated, but the board saw only a bitter founder unable to share credit. The vote was swift. I would retain my equity but step down from all operational roles, effective immediately. Veronica would assume the CEO position. Temporarily, though we all knew nothing was temporary about her ambition. They offered me a face-saving exit, Chief Technical Advisor, a meaningless title that would let me keep my dignity while she took my company. "This is what's best for Nexalink," Richard said, not meeting my eyes. Sometimes founders need to know when to step aside for the company to reach its full potential. I remember walking out of that room, passing the desks of employees I'd hired, seeing the mixture of pity and relief in their eyes. Veronica had poisoned them all against me, the paranoid founder who'd become a liability. The walk to the elevator felt endless. My cardboard box of personal items weighing nothing compared to the crushing realization that I'd lost everything. That night, I sat in my empty apartment. I'd been practically living at the office for 3 years and felt the full weight of the betrayal. Not just the company, but the systematic destruction of my reputation. Veronica had sent out a press release within hours, praising my technical contributions while emphasizing the need for experienced leadership going forward. Tech blogs picked it up immediately. Nexalink founder steps down as company enters growth phase. The cruelest part came 3 days later. She called me, to offer condolences. "Emily, I want you to know this wasn't personal. You're brilliant, truly. But not everyone is meant to be a CEO. I hope someday you'll see I did this for you as much as the company." The condescension was so thick I could barely breathe. My lawyer, David Flores, was blunt when I consulted him. "You could fight this, spend 2 years in court, maybe win, maybe not. Legal fees would run you $500,000 minimum. And meanwhile, she's running your company into the ground or selling it off piece by piece. Is that what you want?" I spent the next week in a haze, ignoring calls, emails, the world outside. Former employees reached out with varying degrees of genuine concern and schadenfreude. My mom called from Ohio, confused by news articles that barely mentioned my name. "Honey, I thought this was your company." Even she had been fooled by Veronica's narrative. But on day 8 of my exile, clarity came with my morning coffee. I pulled out my laptop and started reviewing every document from Nexalink's formation, every patent filing, every legal agreement I'd signed in those bleary-eyed early days. And there, buried in the technical patent documentation for our core algorithm, the one Veronica had been too business-focused to read thoroughly, I found it. A single clause I'd insisted on, back when our first lawyer had called me paranoid. I retained exclusive licensing rights to the underlying mathematical framework, separate from the company's implementation. Without that license, Nexalink's product was just fancy interface design wrapped around nothing. And that license? It was mine, personally, unequivocally, and irrevocably. I closed my laptop and smiled for the first time in weeks. Veronica thought she'd won everything. She had no idea she'd stolen an empty shell. The plan formed in my mind like code compiling, each piece clicking into place with beautiful, ruthless logic. I wasn't going to waste time and money on lawyers and courtrooms where Veronica had already poisoned the jury. No, I was going to play a different game entirely, one where the rules were written in contracts she'd never bothered to read. My first move was a meeting with Harrison Blackwell, CEO of Apex Dynamics, Nexalink's biggest competitor. We met at a private club downtown, the kind where deals that reshape industries happen over aged whiskey. Harrison was old-school Silicon Valley, the kind of shark who appreciated elegant brutality in business. "Emily," he said, studying me over his tumbler, "I heard about your situation. Unfortunate." The word held no sympathy, only assessment. "Actually, Harrison, my situation is quite fortunate. For you." I slid across a single page, the licensing agreement for my algorithm. "Without this, Nexalink is a pretty UI wrapped around nothing. With it, you could build something that makes Nexalink obsolete within 6 months." His eyes sharpened as he read. "This is legally yours, personally?" Ironically, Veronica's restructuring made it even more ironclad. She separated my technical contributions from my executive role, thinking it would minimize my importance. Instead, she clarified that the core IP was never part of my employment agreement. But I wasn't done. The licensing agreement was just leverage for what I really wanted, the complete acquisition of Nexalink itself. Not for me, for Apex. With me as the architect of its destruction. "Here's what you're going to do," I told Harrison. "You're going to approach the board with an acquisition offer, generous enough that they can't refuse without facing shareholder lawsuits. But the deal will be contingent on acquiring all associated intellectual property rights." I smiled. "Rights that I happen to control." Harrison leaned back, a predator recognizing another predator. "And Veronica. We'll be begging the board to accept. She's been CEO for less than 2 weeks. An acquisition this profitable? She'll look like a genius. Right until the moment she realizes the company she's selling is worthless without my cooperation." The next phase required patience and performance. I had to become the defeated founder, the bitter ex-CEO, nursing wounds and grudges. I posted vague motivational quotes on LinkedIn about new beginnings and learning from failure. I was spotted at yoga classes and therapy sessions, very publicly working on letting go and finding peace. Meanwhile, I met with Harrison's team in secret, providing them with everything they needed to make an irresistible offer. Not insider information, that would be illegal. Just insights into what the board valued, what numbers would make their eyes light up, what promises would make them salivate. I knew every board member's pressure points, their debts, their desires, their fears. Veronica, drunk on her newfound power, never saw it coming. She was too busy giving interviews about female leadership in tech and the courage to make hard decisions for the company's future. She'd even started a podcast, The Veronica Hale Story, Building Success from Vision. Every episode was another nail in her coffin, more evidence of her hubris. 3 weeks into her reign, Apex made their move. The offer was perfect, 40% above market valuation, all-cash deal, retention packages for key employees, and Veronica would receive a VP position at Apex with a golden parachute that would make her rich enough to never work again. It was everything a new CEO would dream of delivering to prove their worth. The beautiful part was watching Veronica champion the deal. She called emergency board meetings, brought in investment bankers, created presentations showing how this was the optimal exit strategy. She was so focused on the glory of engineering a massive acquisition that she never questioned why Apex was being so generous. David Flores, my lawyer, had one job during this period: stay silent until the perfect moment. We drafted letter after letter, each one explaining the licensing situation, each one waiting to be sent at precisely the right time. Not too early, that would give them time to maneuver. Not too late, that would be pointless cruelty. The timing had to be perfect, like a blade between ribs. I also started reaching out to key employees, the ones who'd built Nexalink with me before Veronica arrived. Not to warn them, that would be illegal interference. Just to check in, to let them know I was thinking of them, to remind them that I'd always tried to protect their interests. Seeds of doubt about Veronica's sudden rise, planted with surgical precision. The press was the final component. I gave exactly one interview to TechCrunch, carefully scripted to seem supportive while highlighting subtle inconsistencies in Veronica's narrative. "I'm proud of what the team built," I said. "Of course, the core algorithm that powers everything, that was my baby from day one. But leadership is about more than just technical innovation. Every word true, every implication deadly. By the time the acquisition documents were being drafted, Veronica was practically glowing. She'd pulled off in 1 month what I hadn't managed in 3 years, a massive exit that would make everyone rich. The board praised her vision. Investors called her a genius. She even had the audacity to email me, "No hard feelings, Emily. This is what's best for everyone." I drafted my response but didn't send it. Not yet. Let her have this moment, this peak of triumph. The fall would be so much sweeter. The psychological game I played over the next 3 weeks was perhaps my finest performance. I became the ghost of startup past, visible enough to remind everyone of my existence, absent enough to seem irrelevant. When former colleagues saw me at Whole Foods buying wine at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, I made sure my smile was just sad enough to confirm their assumptions about my state of mind. Veronica, intoxicated by her approaching victory, grew careless. She started spending company money on transition consultants, friends from her Boston days who billed astronomical rates for obvious advice. She renovated the executive office I'd never wanted, installing a $30,000 desk that screamed insecurity. Every excess was another confirmation that she'd never understood what Nexalink really was. The masterstroke was accepting her invitation to lunch. She'd called it closure, but we both knew it was victory lap. We met at Meridian, Brookview's most pretentious restaurant, where she'd specifically requested the table by the window, the better to be seen dining with the defeated former CEO. "Emily," she said, radiating false warmth, "I want you to know I've negotiated a special provision for you in the Apex deal. A consultant role. If you want it, 6 figures, minimal responsibilities. It's the least I could do." I let my eyes water, not difficult, considering the rage simmering beneath my skin. "That's generous, Veronica. Thank you." She reached across the table, patting my hand like I was a senile grandmother. "We're all founders in our own way, aren't we? Yours was the vision, mine was the execution. Together, we built something amazing." "Together," I repeated, tasting bile. "You know, I've been doing a lot of thinking about our journey, about all the little decisions that led us here." "Growth requires hard choices," she said, already crafting her TED Talk in her head. "Like the patent structure," I mused, stirring my untouched soup. "Did you ever read the full documentation on the algorithm licensing?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Of course, the lawyers handled all of that in the acquisition prep. The Apex lawyers are very thorough," I agreed. "Harrison Blackwell doesn't leave anything to chance." Something in my tone must have penetrated her armor of arrogance. "What are you saying, Emily?" "Nothing, just appreciating the thoroughness. You always were detail-oriented." The lie was so blatant it felt like performance art. She spent the rest of lunch probing, but I gave her nothing except wistful reminiscence about the old days, 3 months ago. When the check came, she paid with the company card, another small violation she'd grown comfortable with. I watched her sign the receipt with a flourish, still playing CEO even in her signatures. That afternoon, she called Harrison directly. I know because Harrison called me immediately after, laughing so hard he could barely speak. She wanted to know if we'd completed IP due diligence. The panic in her voice. "Emily." It was beautiful. "What did you tell her?" "That our lawyers were handling everything, and we were completely satisfied with the asset verification." Which is true. We verified that the assets are yours, not theirs. The next 2 weeks were torture for Veronica, though she tried to hide it. She had the company lawyers review every document, searching for the trap she could now smell but not see. But the beauty was there was no trap, just the simple, brutal fact that she'd never understood what she was stealing. She tried to reach out to me again, multiple texts suggesting we clear up some technical details about the algorithm. I responded once, "I'm trying to move on. Veronica, this is your success story now." The Apex acquisition moved forward with momentum that couldn't be stopped without raising questions Veronica couldn't answer. How could she explain to the board that she might have missed something this fundamental? that the algorithm she'd claimed to understand, to have helped develop, might not actually belong to the company? I started appearing at the office building again, not going up, just grabbing coffee from the lobby cafe where everyone could see me. Relaxed, unbothered, chatting with the security guard about his new grandchild. The contrast with Veronica's increasing agitation was noted by everyone. Then came the final board meeting before signing. Veronica presented the terms one more time, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she clicked through slides. Harrison was there via video, smiling like a benevolent uncle. The board members were calculating their windfalls. "Before we vote," Richard Steinberg said, "Veronica, is there anything else we should know? Any potential complications?" She hesitated for just a second too long. "No, everything is perfect." The vote was unanimous. The signing would be in 3 days. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, good wine, not the grocery store kind I'd been buying for show, and reread every email Veronica had sent me over the past 6 months. The progression from calculated friendship to open condescension was fascinating. In 3 days, she'd understand what real condescension looked like. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Brookview Grand Hotel's presidential suite, Veronica's choice, naturally. She'd invited tech journalists, industry influencers, even a photographer to capture her triumph. The hubris was breathtaking. I arrived at 9:45, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to my first investor pitch, the one where I'd convinced people to believe in a dream. The room buzzed with anticipation, champagne chilled in silver buckets, waiting for the moment signatures hit paper. Veronica stood at the center, radiant in a cream designer suit that probably cost more than I'd paid myself in the first year of Nexalink. She was holding court, describing her vision for strategic exits to a cluster of reporters. When she saw me, her smile tightened. "Emily, I didn't expect you." "I wouldn't miss this for the world," I said, taking a glass of water from a passing server, not champagne. I wanted to be completely sober for this. Harrison Blackwell arrived with his legal team, all sharp suits and sharper smiles. He caught my eye and nodded, a general acknowledging his artillery was in position. The board members filed in, Richard Steinberg already calculating his next yacht purchase. At 10 a.m. sharp, the lawyers laid out the documents. Hundreds of pages representing the sale of my life's work, reduced to signature lines and notary stamps. Veronica picked up the Mont Blanc pen she'd bought specifically for this moment. "Before we proceed," Harrison said casually, "there's one small formality. We need verification of the IP transfer for the core algorithm, standard procedure." Veronica's hand stilled. "All intellectual property owned by Nexalink is included in the sale." "Certainly. But the algorithm licensing agreement, we need Emily's signature for that transfer." The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice carrying perfectly in the hushed space. "What licensing agreement?" David Flores, my lawyer, materialized beside me like a summoned demon, pulling documents from his briefcase. "Ms. Carter retains personal ownership of the mathematical framework underlying Nexalink's core technology. The company has a usage license, but ownership and transfer rights remain with her." Veronica's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, horror. "That's impossible. The algorithm was developed for the company." "Actually," I interrupted, "it was developed by me, 18 months before I incorporated Nexalink. I licensed it to the company I founded. It's all here in the original patent filing." I turned to the reporters, who were now recording every word. "You did read the patent documentation, didn't you, Veronica? As CEO, I mean? This is extortion." She spun toward Richard. "She's trying to sabotage the deal." Richard was scanning the documents David had provided, his face growing paler with each page. "Veronica, is this true? Did you not verify IP ownership?" "She's lying. The algorithm belongs to Nexalink." Harrison cleared his throat. "I'm afraid without clear IP ownership, Apex must withdraw our offer. We're acquiring technology, not just a brand name." The room erupted, Board members shouting, reporters typing furiously, Veronica standing frozen at the center of the chaos she'd created. The Mont Blanc pen rolled off the table, hitting the marble floor with a crack like breaking bones. I walked over to her, close enough that only she could hear me. You were right about one thing. Not everyone is meant to be CEO. You wanted my company? Congratulations. You now own exactly what you understood about it, nothing. You planned this, she whispered, her perfect composure finally cracking. You let me steal a shell? Yes. You were so busy rewriting history. You never studied it. The algorithm was always mine. The company was just a vehicle. And you? I smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut. You were just a very expensive lesson in trust. Richard Steinberg's voice boomed across the room. Veronica, we need an explanation. Now! As she turned to face the board's fury, I walked toward the door. Behind me. I heard her voice breaking as she tried to explain how she'd orchestrated the biggest acquisition in Brookview's tech history without understanding what she was actually selling. The reporters smelled blood in the water. At the doorway, I paused and looked back. Veronica stood alone in the center of the room, her cream suit like a target, while everyone who'd celebrated her genius minutes ago now circled like hungry wolves. The photographer was still taking pictures, capturing her destruction in high resolution. Ms. Carter, a reporter called out. What's next for you? I considered the question. I'm starting something new. Something built on solid foundations this time. As the elevator doors closed, I could still hear the shouting from the presidential suite. By tonight, every tech blog would carry the story. Nexalink acquisition collapses as former CEO reveals devastating IP ownership claim. Veronica's name would become a cautionary tale. A reminder that stealing a company meant nothing if you didn't understand what made it valuable. The algorithm was mine. It always had been. And now, so was my revenge. I walked out of the Brookview Grand Hotel into a morning that felt different from any I'd experienced in months. The weight that had been crushing my chest since that boardroom coup was gone, replaced by something that wasn't quite joy. It was cleaner than that. It was the absence of injustice, the settling of scales that had been deliberately unbalanced. My phone buzzed incessantly as I walked to my car. Reporters, former employees, investors. Everyone wanted to understand what had just happened. I turned it off. They'd figure it out soon enough. Veronica's professional obituary would write itself in tweets and think pieces, dissected by the same people who'd praised her strategic brilliance just hours ago. By evening, the tech blogs had the story. The Great Nexalink Implosion, one called it. Another ran with how a founder's paranoia saved her algorithm. But my favorite was from a small industry newsletter, Due Diligence, a Cautionary Tale. They'd interviewed 3 board members, all claiming they'd suspected something was wrong all along. Revisionist history was apparently contagious. Veronica's LinkedIn profile disappeared by midnight. Her podcast was pulled from all platforms by morning. The woman who'd spent 6 months crafting her image as a visionary leader had become a ghost in less than 24 hours. The cruelty of Silicon Valley's memory was that it only remembered success and spectacular failure. Mediocrity and quiet departures were instantly forgotten. But what Veronica had done would be remembered for years. I received one final email from her a week later. No subject line, just 3 paragraphs of rage and self-pity. Blaming me for destroying her career, for not warning her, for being vindictive beyond reason. I read it once, then archived it. There was nothing to say. She'd played a game without understanding the rules, bet everything on cards she'd never actually held. Harrison Blackwell called the next day with a different kind of offer. Emily, we still want your algorithm. But this time, we want you too. Full autonomy, your own division, the resources to build something real. I considered it for exactly 5 seconds. No, Harrison, I'm done building things for other people to take credit for. Instead, I started over. New company, new structure, new safeguards. Every employee signed agreements acknowledging my ownership of core IP. Every board member was chosen for integrity over connections. Every decision was documented, verified, witnessed. Paranoia, I'd learned, was just another word for preparation. The new company was smaller, quieter, but it was mine in a way Nexalink had never been, even before Veronica. I'd learned that building something valuable wasn't enough. You had to build it in a way that couldn't be stolen, corrupted, or perverted by those who confused proximity with ownership. 6 months later, I saw Richard Steinberg at a conference. He tried to avoid me, but we ended up in the same elevator. "Emily," he said, studying his shoes. "For what it's worth, we should have listened to you." "No," I replied. "You should have done your job." The elevator opened, and I walked out without looking back. That was the thing about revenge. It wasn't about making them sorry, it was about making them irrelevant. Nexalink dissolved 3 months after the failed acquisition. Without the algorithm, without leadership, without purpose, it simply ceased to exist. The office space was leased by another startup, one that probably had its own Veronicas waiting in the wings, its own founders who believed trust was stronger than contracts. But I was done with that world of fake smiles and stolen dreams. My new company operated differently, transparent, protected, and absolutely ruthless about documentation. Every line of code was traced to its creator, every idea was credited properly, every contribution was recorded. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was architecture. Some nights, I'd stand in my new office, smaller than the old one, but truly mine, and think about that morning in the hotel suite. The moment Veronica's face had cracked, when she'd realized the empire she'd stolen was built on something she'd never bothered to understand. It wasn't satisfying, exactly. Satisfaction implied an emotional closure I didn't feel. What I felt was simpler. I had won. Not through corporate politics or manipulation or networking or any of the weapons she'd used against me. I'd won through the very thing she'd dismissed as secondary. The technical brilliance she'd never respected enough to comprehend. The algorithm she'd claimed to have helped create had been her destruction. Encrypted in legal language she'd been too arrogant to read. The last I heard, Veronica had moved back to Boston, working as a consultant for companies that didn't Google their contractors too carefully. The woman who'd wanted to be the face of female leadership in tech had become a cautionary tale whispered at networking events. "Don't pull a Veronica" became shorthand for overplaying your hand without understanding your cards. And me? I built. Carefully. Methodically. Protected by lessons written in scar tissue. The company that should have been mine was gone, but what I created from its ashes was stronger. Because now I knew. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. But success? That was a revenge that never needed explaining. The algorithm still hummed in servers across 3 continents, powering solutions for problems Veronica never understood existed. And late at night, when the office was quiet and the code was compiling, I'd allow myself one small smile. She'd wanted my company. In the end, all she'd gotten was an education in why you should never steal from someone who writes their own rules, in code and in life. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in my position?